Hello, I'm Scott Turner, and I'm Director of Science Programs at the National Association of Scholars. And this is the Week in Science for the 15th of May, 2025. Today, we look at artificial intelligence and the ongoing meltdown over cuts in science spending. And we end with a refreshing spritz of some actual science of waving cuttlefish and clockwork life. Okay, let's jump in. In the education world, AI, artificial intelligence, has been in the news a lot lately. Mostly, it's been fretting about the threat that AI poses for getting students to, do what students are supposed to do: study, learn, and demonstrate that they've actually learned something. But how can students do this when they can just go to ChatGPT to write their assignments or to take their exams for them, which students are doing and in increasing numbers? Okay, that sounds bad enough, but what about AI in science? Now, I just want to clarify, I'm not against AI. I think it has its uses. It could be used, for example, to compile summaries of research on some topic, say a neurological disorder. The summary could be used to bring new researchers up to speed, or to help draft a pamphlet to educate the public. But I also think there's some significant potential for abuse there. Science is going through a bit of a crisis right now, and AI has the potential to make it much worse. That's the gist of this article by Diana Kwan in this week's edition of Nature magazine. Scientists are increasingly using AI in their work in a variety of ways. So, Nature magazine decided to do a survey of about 5,000 published authors to see how AI is shaping scientists' publication habits and their attitudes toward its use. Editing a draft manuscript is the most common use. Translating a paper into a foreign language, or vice versa, also is common. Those seem legit. So far, at least, very few are using ChatGPT and other large language models to write a paper's first draft, and that seems prudent. There are aspects of writing a paper that can be drudge work, like writing up a materials and methods section or an abstract, and AI could help with that. Writing an abstract was the most common use of AI among scientists, and that makes sense, given that the abstract is meant to be a concise summary of the paper itself, for which ChatGPT is pretty well suited. Assuredly, scientists generally were leery of using AI to write a paper's results section. There's too much opportunity for mistakes and data fudging in there, especially given AI's tendency to just make stuff up when it doesn't know what it's doing. Even so, scientists mostly want to write their papers the old-fashioned way. So the brave new world is not here yet. How about different cohorts of scientists? PhD students were the most likely to favor using AI to help write papers, while senior and retired scientists were more skeptical. When queried about whether they had actually used AI to write their papers, the incidence of use followed closely whether the person found it appropriate or not. PhD students were more likely to actually use AI, while senior scientists were less likely. And demographics being destiny, the use of AI to write papers will likely expand over time as these younger cohorts move through their careers. The most interesting trend, disturbing trend I would say, was the use of AI in peer review of papers, where the opinion of an actual human being might be helpful. There's much more significant potential for abuse here. If writing a paper is drudgery, and it is, reviewing a paper is often worse. And the strong temptation will always be there to bring AI to bear on that task. So, one can imagine a dystopian world where AI writes the papers and AI reviews the papers, and no actual human being need ever be involved. On that front, the news is good, so far at least. But there is that demographic trend. Using AI to both write and review papers is going to increase with time, and with it, the likelihood of a completely human-free path to publication. So far, scientists seem content to fall back on their ethical norms to prevent that dystopian future coming true. To quote from the paper, I would be horrified to be reviewed by AI. So would I. We probably shouldn't be so confident, though. For one thing, the nature of the scientific paper is changing. Where once it had been a medium for scientists to talk to one another, now, and increasingly, papers are being used as tokens for professional rewards. The more papers you publish, the more likely it is that you will be promoted, get tenure, get that next grant. In other words, scientists are increasingly being rewarded for scientific productivity, and AI is a productivity tool. In any case, we're already halfway to the dystopian world of the human-free scientific publication. An alarming proportion of the nearly 500,000 papers published annually by American scientists are never read. And an alarming proportion of those papers are useless or fraudulent. Publishing them still allows scientists to pile up those tokens, though. So, like it or not, there's a real potential that AI will drag us over the edge into the complete trivialization of the scientific literature, and we, the scientists, will be the culprits that made it happen. The Trump terror continues. Last week's edition of Science magazine was dominated by lamenting Donald Trump's first 100 days in office. Devoting a whole issue to that topic didn't quite get it out of their systems, though, and this week's edition continued the hand-wringing over just how totally bad things are looking. First off the bat was this editorial about institutionalizing politicized science. Well, that sounds bad. Science should be apolitical. That's what we should expect for the $200 billion we sink into it every year. That's not quite what this editorial was complaining about, though. Donald Trump was elected to, as the saying goes, drain the swamp of the entrenched federal bureaucracy that makes up the so-called deep state. To drain a swamp, you need tools. And one of President Trump's tools is to change the rules that keep the deep state in place. And among these are rules that make it difficult to dismiss civil servants. Here's where things get a little complicated, so please bear with me. The president has always been able to dismiss one class of civil servants at will. This includes cabinet members, high-level administrators of executive agencies, those sorts of people. The people who have to look for new jobs when administrations change. These positions are presently pretty rare, accounting for about 4,000 of the roughly 2 million civil service employees. President Trump wants to expand this number to about 50,000 in an executive order known as Schedule F. This would enable a president to remove, among other people, high-level science administrators and scientific staffers that are presently very difficult to dismiss. The science-oriented agencies, like the EPA, or NASA, or the NIH, are heavily populated with this special class of civil servants, and that's the complaint behind this editorial. But, you might say, don't we want to protect the science bureaucracies from politics? The problem, you see, is that the science bureaucracies are already highly politicized. There is, in fact, a scientific deep state. And draining the swamp means changing the employment rules that entrench the scientific deep state. And extending the reach through Schedule F will let the president do that. The authors of this editorial don't want that to happen. They claim it will make career scientists unwilling hostages to politics. But who is holding whom hostage here? Arguably, it's the scientific deep state, the unelected and largely unaccountable scientific deep state, I would add, that is the hostage taker here. So the writers of this editorial weren't really objecting to politicization of the federal science bureaucracy. They're fine with it being politicized as long as it's the politicization they like. Fright Week continues. Trump is taking steps toward a radically different NSF. Democratic lawmakers are wringing their hands over who's in charge of the NSF. Well, the NSF is an executive agency, so wouldn't that be the president who's in charge? It's not so much a radically different NSF that the Trump administration is looking toward, but returning the NSF to something closer to its original mission. In the past couple of decades, the NSF has expanded into a bloated science bureaucracy. Starting off at 3 directorates, the NSF now has 8 of them, comprising 37 different divisions. Some of these new directorates have been the engines for most of the politicization coming out of the NSF, particularly in the last 4 years. White physics, that sort of thing. They've been part of that scientific deep state, you see, and the Education Directorate is the biggest offender here. Trump aims to close that directorate down, along with several others, to refocus the NSF on priorities like artificial intelligence. To summarize, world ends, Education Directorate, hardest hit. It won't be missed, to be honest. If anything, closing it down will free up more money for the real science that NSF exists to support. Also in the news, the Trump cuts are fueling a, quote, fear factor, close quote, that is silencing researchers. Oh, really? This is all getting kind of tedious. This article is about researchers in the misinformation industry. You know, the ones who want to silence the unapproved narratives. Don't you see, comrades? The United Auto Workers Gaslighting Group, Stand Up for Science, is back, quote, stronger than ever, they say. We last met Stand Up for Science in March when they held a sad little rally on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. We covered it then on our YouTube channel. Have a look. The most memorable thing about that rally was the debut of former NIH Director Francis Collins as a folk singer.
Well, this is a song for all the good people who are part of this family.
Make it stop. What was getting everyone up in arms then were those modest cuts of indirect cost reimbursements on grants to about 1/3 of what they had always been. That ramped the catastrophe hysteria up to 11. Well, the Trump juggernaut has since rolled on to larger reforms of federal science funding. The indirect costs kerfuffle has mostly faded into obscurity. But never mind. Stand Up for Science thinks it was so successful in March that they want everyone to spend their summer, quote, taking back science. Get in, dorks, is their rallying cry. Well, dorks, I hate to break the news, but science isn't really yours to take back. Your predecessors sold it to the feds in 1950, lock, stock, and barrel, which came in and basically took it over. If you want it back, you're going to have to buy it back, and good luck with that. But maybe you'll get lucky. You might have some powerful money behind you. To show how ever so serious they are about science, they're all in on the Lauren Sanchez, Jeff Bezos Space Glam Tour. Smash the space patriarchy, or something. So maybe Jeff will buy science back for you. Isn't all this science funding angst getting just a little tedious? This podcast series is called The Week in Science, after all. So, how about some actual science? Okay, we'll start with cuttlefish. Invertebrates are pretty underrated creatures. I've always had a soft spot for them, though. We tend to think of them as mindless little blobs and think of ourselves as the only intelligent creatures on the planet. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. Intelligence of one form or another actually is a universal feature of life. Sometimes the intelligence is, let's face it, pretty elementary, but it can rise to a pretty high level, as it does in us. And high intelligence can also arise among those squishy invertebrates. Social insect colonies, like termites or ants or bees, are actually pretty smart. Some of the highest examples of invertebrate intelligence can be found among the mollusks of all things, particularly among the cephalopods, octopus, squid, and cuttlefish. Which brings me to this paper, published in the biology preprint server bioRxiv by two French scientists, Sophie Cohen-Bodenas and Peter Neri. I've probably botched the pronunciation. Sorry. Cuttlefish are sometimes called the chameleons of the sea, in part because of their remarkable ability to change color dramatically, rapidly, and adaptively. Cuttlefish use this ability to talk to other cuttlefish, but it also enables them to blend in quite closely with their surroundings, hence the moniker, chameleons of the sea. Which raises a problem. How does one cuttlefish use color to communicate with another cuttlefish when it's camouflaged and virtually invisible? There's a related problem. How does a camouflaged cuttlefish communicate visually with another without giving away its presence to any hungry predator that might be lurking nearby? The dilemma would be resolved if there was some kind of cryptic line of communication between them, and that's what this paper is about. In addition to changing color, cuttlefish signal one another with stereotypical arm wave displays, using 4 of their tentacles. Scientific American describes this display as, quote, disco arm waving, which kind of trivializes it. There's a pretty strong visual component to this signaling. No surprise there. The cephalopods have very well developed vision. And if a video of one cuttlefish doing the arm wave is played back to a live cuttlefish watching it on TV, the live cuttlefish will wave back. So these things are waving their tentacles to communicate visually to other cuttlefish. Different patterns of arm waving, the choreography essentially, are encoding different messages from one cuttlefish to another. But back to that question. What if the cuttlefish waving its tentacles is camouflaged? How does it signal another cuttlefish if the other cuttlefish can't see it? And that's the intriguing question these researchers wanted to answer. And the answer is they do it with sound. When a cuttlefish waves its arms, it creates a sound that can be transmitted through the water. You know, like that whooshing sound we make when we paddle our way through water. So, they recorded the sounds made by the arm waving display. When they played just the recorded sounds back to the cuttlefish without the visual cues, sure enough, the cuttlefish start to do their arm wave. So while the cuttlefish arm wave certainly can serve as a visual cue, the sound it makes can also communicate messages from one cuttlefish to another. And this just might be that cryptic back channel of communication between cuttlefish that are trying to hide. To wrap things up for today, let's stretch our scientific legs a bit. When it comes to the phenomenon of life, there's always been a deep and unresolved question. The question is simply this: is life a phenomenon unlike all other phenomena in the universe? Or is life just a very complex example of those other phenomena? Let's reword that. Is life just very complicated chemistry and physics? Or is there something special about it? Modern biology is very reluctant to stray outside the lines that are staked out by physics and chemistry. Thinking that there's something special about life usually gets you accused of being a vitalist, and that's double plus biology bad think, the V word. In most scientists' eyes, being a vitalist excludes you from the club of being a real scientist. But then I'm reminded of the famous quote from J.B.S. Haldane, that vitalism is like a beautiful mistress that you can't be without, but don't want to be seen with in public. Or, to quote Dorian Sagan, all biologists are closet vitalists. Just for the record, I identify myself as a small v vitalist. I came out, or maybe it's better to say came over, about 8 years ago. What sets life apart, in my view, is that it is intentional and purposeful in a way that, say, the orbits of the planets are not. No one would say, for example, that the Earth wants to orbit the Sun. It's reasonable to say, to take from our last segment, that cuttlefish want to talk to one another. Which brings me to this article by Stuart Kaufman and Andrea Roll in the Journal of the Institute of Arts and Ideas. Kaufman is a big player in the science of the origin of life, and he has some interesting ideas on that. Here, he asks about laws in science. Ever since Isaac Newton, the, quote, scientific approach to the world has been to treat it as a clockwork, that is, as a machine that works according to physical principles and limitations. The rotation of the planets around the sun is an example of a clockwork solar system. You set it in motion, and it operates according to certain laws, in this case, Newton's law of universal gravitation. Just plug in the variables, and you can predict the motion of the planets, and it should work in any solar system of the universe, not just our own. What about life? Can you treat life as if it's just a very complicated clockwork? His interesting conclusion is that no, you can't. And that scuttles any notion that biology is the next scientific frontier for physics to conquer. Physics can't claim that territory because life is not a clockwork, meaning there are no laws in biology. And if physics is about anything, it's working out the laws governing clockworks. So, Kaufman says, if we're looking for the next scientific revolution, it will be biology, not physics, that will lead the way. And it will be life's endless creativity, what Charles Darwin called life's endless forms most beautiful, that will be front and center. If we're willing to be vitalists, that is. Okay, that's it for the Week in Science for May 18th, 2025. There's more content like this on the National Association of Scholars YouTube page, including a playlist for this podcast. Check us out. And while you're at it, visit us also on the National Association of Scholars website at nas.org. If you enjoyed this show, consider joining us as a member, and if you're already a member, thanks for your ongoing support. Until next week, I'm Scott Turner, Director of Science Programs at the National Association of Scholars.